start shortly.
We're
good. Broadcasting chair.
Okay. What's Nicky's role? Good morning. Welcome to this session of the Welsh Affairs Committee. We're continuing our inquiry into prisons in Wales. Delighted that we're joined this morning by Nicky Park from the St Giles Trust, which works with disadvantaged people, including people who come into contact with the criminal justice system. And we're joined by Yvonne Thomas, the Chief Executive of the Clink charity, which does work at several prisons in Wales. So perhaps I can start the session by just asking a very general question, starting with yourself, Ms Park. Just to describe how your organisations work with prisoners in Wales. What does that look like in a practical sense?
Yeah, so for us we do a number of different things within the prison estate. So we have the probation contract, the CRS contract for personal wellbeing across Wales. That's Pan Wales, so that is for young adults and adult males. And that is providing support within custody on things around family support, emotional well-being, but also around social inclusion, which is basically a through-the-gate element of the contract. And that is across all of the prisons within Wales. And then we also deliver in Cardiff and in Berwyn. We deliver our peer advisor programme, which is around training people in custody to support other people in custody and to gain a level 3 qualification around advice and guidance. But it's more than, I suppose, just giving advice and guidance around resettlement support. It's also around providing emotional well-being support to be able to, in a way, I think, take pressure off officers and things like that. So it provides support around really basic things like completing applications, but also about giving advice on housing and giving advice on benefits and what they're entitled to, but also about providing them with that support on what to expect when they're released. From someone who has been there and kind of going through those similar experiences. And we find that has been really valuable. And then through that at HMP Berwyn, we also provide ROTL support. So we were the first to receive ROTLs out of HMP Berwyn, and they work with our community services. Within Wrexham, we have a pantry which supports the local community, and we have a number of men who are working and gaining their level 3 qualification and are also in paid employment with us on ROTL.
ROTL is? Release
on temporary licence. Apologies for any acronyms.
No, just to get that on the record. And is the contract that you have, you say you work in all of the prisons in Wales, does that come as effectively the job lot contract with the prison service, or are they individual contracts for each prison? No, they are a job lot. Okay. So how the CRS, the Community Rehabilitation Services, how they were commissioned back in 2021, they were done for, the personal wellbeing contract was done for Wales, and then the young adults was also done as a separate contract. But it's to work with men being released into Wales and those who are in custody. So it is that Pan Wales. Okay, thank you very much. And Yvonne Thomas, the Clink charity, are you able to give us an update on the work you do with prisoners in Wales?
Okay, so we work in Cardiff and Swansea prison, basically training people to become hospitality professionals. So we work in the prison kitchens. We have we're effectively a virtual college, so we're a City and Guilds accrediting body. We then deliver pre- and post-release support into employment and accommodation for anyone who's trained with us, and there is no limit to that support. That the work in Wales of that nature is 100% charitably funded. We then also administer the Wales Turn to Us Fund, which is not just for our own students and graduates, and that's a great fund that's for people in prison and on probation who are either in or returning to Wales. It's grant funding. It helps towards the cost of supporting accommodation and employment, so we can we can award, for example, up to 3 months rent, a rent deposit. We bought people bicycles so they can get to work. We can buy them a mobile phone, and it's very much our support workers on the ground who make that determination. And then finally, because there are, of course, no women's prisons or APs in Wales, we train women who are returning to Wales, and certainly in the last year that's been Style, where we have a major training site, Eastwood Park, where we also have a number of training programmes, but we've had women in Downview, where we have a professional training kitchen, and H&P Send in Surrey. So our support staff in England will identify those as returners to Wales, hand them over to our team in Wales, and that's what we do, and that's part of the bigger charity. We operate in 36, 37 prisons across England and Wales. We trained and supported around about 800 people last year.
Thank you very much. That's a really helpful introduction. I'll start bringing colleagues in now. Ruth Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, ladies. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. It's good to see you. Can I talk to Ms Thomas first about the Clink? I mean, I've been to the Clink in Cardiff, and it was brilliant. It was really enjoyable experience. But obviously, it's closed in March 2023 as a result of the charitable funding being withdrawn. Is that right?
So after the sort of 10 years of operation, we actually had a 10-year lease with HMPPS and its predecessors, and my understanding is that the requirement from HMPPS was to repurpose that space as a visitor centre, and therefore the lease was not renewed.
Okay, so but then the Swansea lease is also due up for renewal in 2025.
So in Swansea, that's not a lease. We wanted to retain a presence in Wales because we'd been part of the Welsh rehabilitation efforts for so many years. So we chose, and through agreement went into Cardiff and Swansea prisons. Those are not contracted. We are there. It's fully charitably funded. There's no government funding for either of those projects. That charitable funding will run out in about March 2025, yeah.
And thank you for clarifying that, but what happens then?
Well, unless there is replacement funding available from somewhere, there will be no Clink presence in Wales.
Okay, and do you see that as an issue? Because obviously you're across England and Wales at the moment, so do you see that as an issue?
Yes, we like to spread our rehabilitation efforts wherever they are best placed. Wales has always been a very strong place for us to operate in, and we were very disappointed when the restaurant closed. It was our biggest training site in England and Wales. So we will work very hard to raise the sort of funding that will be needed to keep a good presence in Wales and a meaningful presence. You know, we still keep a team there, and we still support people from the estate in England who are returning to Wales, and I can not see that there won't be a need for that going forward, because the rehabilitation offer is fundamentally an unlimited support offer post-release. So we support people for as long as they need support. And we can't do that effectively if we don't also cover Wales, because so many people are held in England.
And that support would be post-prison across Wales?
Yeah, we support wherever people are released to. So, you know, from Style, we quite commonly have women going back to North Wales. From Eastwood Park, it's normally South and Mid. And then from Surrey, we had a woman from Bridgend in Send. We had a woman from Swansea in Downview. So, yeah, we do support them back in Wales.
Thank you very much. I'll hand you back to the Chair.
Thank you very much. Before I bring in Rob, the charity is very famous for the restaurant it had in Cardiff, which was obviously outside of the wall, so the public could go in there. And I ate there a couple of times about 10 years ago and had very good visits there. And I think there was a misapprehension when it was reported that the restaurant was closing, that was Clink charity no longer carrying on working. And actually what you've explained is that there's a large body of work that is carrying on with prisoners. Just on that point about the restaurant that does have members of the public coming to it, how many of those have you got around the UK?
There's another 3.
Okay.
So we have nearly 37 odd projects. So we have the 3 restaurants, 2 of which are open to the public for booking, 1 of which is open to party bookings. And then there are about 30 Clink kitchens in various prisons where we train people who are cooking for the other prisoners. And again, they're fully vocationally qualified at the end of that, City and Guilds. They all get the support model. And then we have an events business that provides very high order events to places like the Guildhall and St Paul's, etc. And that runs out of Downview Women's Prison in Surrey.
As it stands today, there's no Clink kitchen in any of the Welsh prisons.
There's a Clink kitchen, which is where we teach other prisoners,
yeah,
in HMP Cardiff, and there's one in HMP Swansea.
Right, okay, understood. But it's no longer the restaurant that was open to the public. Thank you. That's very, very helpful. Rob Roberts, please.
Good morning. Just before I get into my question, which is about population increase in Wales, Nicky, you were talking earlier on about the qualifications, and you mentioned level 3 a couple of times.
Yes.
Just for everyone's benefit, because more people watch this online than Match of the Day, all throughout the country. Where does level 3 sit? What is that? A GCSE? Is that a?
It's the equivalent of 2 A levels.
Really?
Yes.
Gosh.
So level 3 is the highest qualification outside of Open University that you can get whilst in custody. Most education providers within the prison estate only offer up to a level 2.
Fabulous. It's wonderful. Let's clear that up. So population increase. So we've been told that over the last few years, prison population has increased in size, and its needs are growing more urgent, more complex with mental health issues and all of the things that come with that. What effect of the developments like that, of the population increase, had on the work that you do with prisoners in Wales?
So, I mean, not only do we have an increasing prison population, but with that we also then have more people that are transferred out of their local prisons, and so they are actually then further away from home, which makes it a lot more challenging to be able to provide that through the gate support, because also often you get examples of not only that they're transferred further away from home, but potentially they are still on short sentences. Referrals often come at very short notice. So actually being able to provide that support, being able to book either legal visits, if we're even able to book those legal visits, or do video links, things like that. So to be able to then receive and give that support can be particularly challenging. Not only have we seen an increase in the prison population, I think we can also safely say that we've seen a reduction in prison staff, and that has also had a significant impact. So what we've also seen is higher levels of lockdown. We've seen split regimes, which have had a huge impact on people being able to access things like education. There's not enough provision for people to be able to receive that element of support whilst in custody. And so I feel like if you have all of those barriers and then you are expecting to be able to provide a rehabilitative service and support to those that are in custody, actually that becomes even more challenging because there's not enough spaces. You've got crowded environments, there's not enough spaces within education for people to be able to receive the support. You therefore have waiting lists, and you have high numbers of people potentially, because they're not being unlocked, being able to access those services. And then you have that if they're on a short sentence, the reality is that by the time a space becomes available, they're being either released or they're being transferred. So those are some of the challenges that you then face.
Do you find there's a backlog? There are more people who want to engage with your services than you have spaces available?
Yes.
A lot more?
And I think especially with the peer programme that we run, simply because I think for a lot, I mean, I always think within prisons you have such an amazing untapped resource and some, hugely great transferable skills within the men and the female estate. And I think what we find is that there are so many people within the prison estate that want to give back, that want to provide that support and want to do something really purposeful with their time whilst they're there, especially those who are serving slightly longer sentences. And so often, our programme is not funded through government, it's not statutory funded, it is funded either through ourselves or charitable trusts. And so we can only provide certain number of courses, and we always have a waiting list of men who are wanting to do it, because not only is it something that they are using their time valuably whilst they're in custody and providing support to their peers, but they are also getting a qualification out of it, and they are getting transferable skills. That it's not just about how to... I mean, we've had people that have done it who are within the construction industry and aren't planning on going and being a caseworker when they are released, but it's something that's really valuable for them to do with their time whilst they're in custody. But then we also have links in the community where we have not either employed people ourselves. I mean, 66% of our staff within St Giles as an organisation have similar lived experiences. 40% of those have criminal convictions. You know, so we are an active employer, and we provide that support when they come out into the community. Actually, wherever we have a service, whether it's in England or whether it's Wales, they can come and apply. But we also have links with other voluntary organisations where we either provide placements for people, and we provide those references and we provide that link. And I think for people in custody to know that there's not just support in custody, that there is a real, valuable, tangible opportunity when they are released, and the support that wraps around that, I think, is really valuable to them.
Fabulous. You have on this subject, Yvonne, on the subject of overcrowding, and not only where we are now, but I think the prospect is that there's going to be, we're about 80 to 88,000 on the in the prison estate now. It's going to be potentially 10% more by this time next year. What are your thoughts on how big a problem that's going to be, and how that's going to affect your work?
Well, I think, I mean, if we look at the moment, I echo much of what Nicky said. I mean, because we are a qualification and employability-based charity, because that's what affects rehabilitation quite significantly, to get an MVQ level 2, which is what we deliver, takes between 4 and 8-9 months typically.
Again,
quite
just for the understanding,
work.
level 2 is
it's a GCSE grades A to C in Old Speak.
Fab.
So we need a certain amount of time. We need stability for that person to attend learning. And what we're finding with the prison population is that prisoners are being moved at short notice to other establishments, so they can't necessarily complete their qualifications, which is actually a bit of wasted time and effort, and it's really demotivational for the individuals as well. So if we can't track them down, or they're not moving to a place that's got Clink training, then the chances of being able to complete are nil. So they're also losing the pre and post release support at that point. So that's the first thing that we've noticed. The second thing that we've noticed is that our vocational training places in prisons aren't being filled. So we run at about 70% occupancy, because staff in prisons are so under pressure that doing the assessments and the allocations to actually make sure that those places can be filled is one of the things that drops off the edges when there are time pressures, and there are constant competing pressures for prison officer resources. So we see both of those as quite big challenges that are sort of beyond our ability to control or manage, and they are directly as a result of the prison population pressures and also the staffing pressures, although in Wales the staffing pressures and the staffing quality are much higher than we, i.e. the pressures are not as great, and the quality of staff that we engage with seems to be higher on the whole than we see in England. More stability in Wales.
Yes, thank you. We'll talk a little bit more about transfers later on, but about 15% of all of the people in prison in Wales are on remand. How much of a problem is that in terms of delivery?
So we used not to train people on remand at all, and it has got to the stage where it is such a large percentage of the prison population that we, a few months ago, extended our criteria, and we now train people on remand awaiting conviction in both Cardiff and Swansea, and we do it elsewhere in the country as well. So in order to do that, we have looked at our curriculum so that we can offer slightly shorter qualifications, and we really do try and accelerate people through those qualifications so that as soon as they either go to court and get a conviction or get their sentence, they may well be sent to another prison. We try and make sure that they exit with something. But it's had quite an effect on us, in terms of the way in which we have to configure delivery and get people through.
So for those on remand, I think one of the other challenges is that for or under the CRS services, so that probation are providing, remands didn't come under the criteria when they were commissioned in 2021. So for the personal wellbeing contracts that we deliver, remands do not come into scope. And one of the challenges that you find is that either someone has been on remand for a long time due to backlogs and things like that you end up that they often get time served and then they are released with nothing. Or you might have that they have like a week left to serve, and so then a quick and rushed referral is made, and you're then trying to find capacity to be able to go and see them for an emergency referral. So you will find a significant number of men being released with very little or no support at all, simply because they spent a large number of their time on remand, when that is a huge opportunity to provide some really important resettlement and rehabilitation support, but they are often ignored.
Would seem to be the biggest crack through which the system.
Yes, fortunately, through the recommissioning exercise that is happening with the market engagements and everything for that HMPPS and MOJ are doing, remands are now on scope. But it's not a new phenomenon, those on remand, so it is slightly frustrating that they were ignored.
The length of remand is rather new, though, right? It's no?
Well, I would love to say that, but in my 19 years of working within criminal justice, I often came across, when I first started in Brixton Prison, on the landings, that I would come across men that had served a year on remand. It isn't new. It's absolutely more frequent now, but there have always been delays in getting sentencing, getting court dates, and the fact that there has been very little support for those on remand, and it's always been that case. There has always been an excuse or a reason behind why people on remand aren't entitled to support.
Thank you.
Thank you. Beth had an intervention.
Just a couple, sorry now. Why do you think that there's been an increase in the numbers on remand, and what would resolve that? I think I know the answer, but you were the experts. And the second one is, if somebody is fortunate enough to be able to access the employment and training in prison, I'm really interested in how that impacts their ability to find employment on release, because from my experience, there is such a lot of stigma attached to somebody who's been in prison, unfortunately, and it's very difficult for former prisoners to access it. So what is that link in terms of the release? So I don't know if one of you wants to answer.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
So the court backlog, I think obviously there was a backlog that built up during COVID when courts were closed, and then there was the added pressures of the various strikes from the legal professional, which has contributed to a big backup in backlog. That is just what it is, I guess. On the support into employment, we have a very good network of employers in Wales, and our support, pre and post support and resettlement model basically matches our Clink graduates who are ready for work, because not all are coming straight out of prison, with employers who we work with. And our support workers actually support both the employer and the graduate coming out. So we put 52% of our supported graduates went into work last year, and they stay in work because of that support model. So they may need that level of support for 3 months, 1 month, 18 months, doesn't matter to us, they just get it. They get what they need, and so does the employer. So we have a national employer manager who's actually based in Wales and is the former manager of our Clink restaurant in Cardiff. He is the one who actually goes out, approaches hospitality and food production employers, explains the benefits of working with people who have an offending background, who happen to have fantastic training and qualifications now as well. And we actually probably have more jobs that we could put graduates into than we have jobs, but not everyone is ready to work when they come out of prison. So that's how we do it, and it seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose for us it's similar. I think if we are working with someone, and especially through the peer programme, and they are wanting to follow that path into the community, we have networks that we utilise as well as our own services to be able to provide those opportunities. And I think for anyone who is linked in with an organisation that provides in custody and through the gate community support, I think that's an easier transition to make. It's often those who are linked in or attend education or do other kind of training courses, but there's not that through the gate element, that things get missed. And I think often it is because people forget that life admin and just life gets in the way because when you are in custody, you don't have those same kind of challenges. And I remember working with one gentleman that always said to me, you know, when he had served a very long sentence and his family had shielded him from a lot of those issues, and then of course he was released and they were like, right, now it's on you. And suddenly life just became really hard. And so the employment opportunities that we had set up, and actually it was set up to work with us, we needed to just put a hold on it and say, okay, we'll just put a pin in that for now, because actually there was just so many other things that he needed to do first to get used to suddenly being back out into the community and what that meant. And I think there are so many times where that is forgotten. And so there are, you know, people have all the best intentions in the world when they're in custody, and you know that they truly mean that. And then they walk through the gate and there is that shift. And often I think there needs to be that wraparound pastoral support around them that recognises that you can't just expect someone to have woken up Monday morning in H&P Berwyn and walks through the gate at 10 in the morning, a free-ish man, and then Tuesday morning walks into a job. It's unrealistic for us to put that expectation on someone, especially if that person might not have worked a legitimate day in their life and not understand what a professional expectation is. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done around employability, building up self-esteem, building up confidence, ensuring that people actually understand what is expected, what is that real world, because prison doesn't provide that. I mean, we've had people who we have thought, you know, had paid work on release on temporary licence for over a year, but that's still a shelter. And then they're actually released and suddenly they have to pay rent, they have to work out their bills, they have to budget and go food shopping, all of those kinds of things that suddenly just becomes a lot. So I think, you know, absolutely it works really well, that transition, when you do have organisations that are both sides of the gates. But if you don't, and it is that reliance on someone to dig deep, can be a particular challenge.
Okay, thank you, really helpful. Virginia.
Thank you, and thank you for coming here today. I wanted to ask you about the COVID-19 and how the pandemic impacted you in terms of providing the support, and also are you actually back to, is it business as usual? If we start with Yvonne, thank you.
Well, we continued with a very small amount of training, primarily in Brixton in England. But we were unable to deliver any training in Wales during the COVID period. And then post-COVID, we opened the training projects in Cardiff and Swansea. because the restaurant obviously had closed by then. And I mean, nationally, we are absolutely back in full swing with a vengeance now.
Thank you. Thank you. So, pre-COVID, and it was at a time when CRCs were still in existence, so TR, Transforming Rehabilitation, was all there. Probation hadn't come back together, hadn't reunified. So it was, through COVID, everything that was being delivered in custody became particularly challenging. It wasn't in the same way you had community. It was very in custody. All services needed to be delivered in custody to be able to provide that rehabilitation support. And that was particularly challenging. You weren't able to have the same access because men weren't out. So a lot of things had to be done in cell. You had to create almost kind of in-cell advice packs and things like that, which we did. And in order to continue with elements of training, we transferred it into kind of in-cell learning, which actually we have continued using those today to be able to provide additional support, but very much complementing in-person training. And then coming out of COVID, I think one of the challenges was always just, as I had said earlier, about the fact that there are more lockdowns, so it has more of an impact. But one of the good things that has come out of it is the use of technology in a slightly better way. You know, I mean, before COVID, I think we were stuck in the dark ages within working in prisons, whereas now, you know, Teams works in a prison. I mean, who knew? You know, so things like that have actually really benefited, and they have helped with being able to bring external organisations almost into the prison without them having to physically come in. So in those kinds of areas, it has worked really well. I think now we are business as usual. The prisons are pretty much probably back to their new normal. So yeah, I think we've been able to take, I think, a lot of the learning and create kind of a new way of working that works well.
And Yvonne, in terms of the learnings that Nicky was mentioning, sort of post-COVID, we had quite a lot of evidence talking about things like mental health and self-harming and how we can sort of support going forward. But what have been your learnings that you've taken with you?
So I think the length of time it took to actually remobilise, because, you know, I think prisons were locked down for an awful lot longer than the rest of us. They came out very, very late. It was almost the forgotten part of the pandemic, 'cause it was so challenging. And I think now, if we were to be faced with something similar, to have effectively a remobilisation plan ready with all the partners that work in a prison, that really sets expectations of how long it should take to return to pre-incident levels, I think would be really helpful. Whilst I would agree that, you know, the access to technology in prisons has moved from the dark ages, probably moved into the middle ages. And I think actually putting access to technology and virtual workshops, teaching environments, etc., would make a terrific difference, and that's still really quite problematic.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ruth Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm following on from Virginia Crosby's question there. I'm looking at the link between education and training, and we had a really good visit to HMP Cardiff recently, and we saw some of the digital technology, the use of iPads and things like that in cells as well as in the education centre, and almost like the passports which can hopefully go with the prisoner from transfers. I'm sure you'll tell me if that's a good idea or not. But we were told there that a lot of prisoners turn up unable to read or write, and that's, you know, getting them to be able to read a story or a book, you know, is a massive step. And I suppose to what extent does that lack of prior education hamper your ability to train and take people forward? Shall I start with Yvonne?
So if you're teaching people to be professional chefs, they've got to be able to read and follow recipes, they've got to be able to weigh and measure things. And what we find is it's a wonderful environment to actually improve people's basic literacy skills. We are starting to deliver apprenticeships in Style Prison in Wales, and by the time you get to the end of an apprenticeship, you have to have hit a certain level of functional skills. And we're very confident that we will be able to coach and support those women through that journey, because our expectation is that their starting level is going to be an average of about the age of 11 or 12, if indeed people can read or write at all. We're also, we're quite innovative at our use of developing supporting materials for the City and Guilds curriculum, so you don't just use the standard stuff. So I think the bringing together of vocational skills and using those as the practical opportunity to actually help people with their English and maths is something that is currently kept quite separate in the world of prisons. So you do functional skills over there, and then you do vocational training over here, and those two are not connected. And I think the opportunity to bring those together would be absolutely fantastic. That's how we do it. We actually do it through teaching people how to cook.
Yes, which is a brilliant way of incentivising people to learn, isn't it? Nicky, do you want to add to that?
I mean, the only thing I think to add to that is that prison education is very traditional. And I think what we all know and what evidence always shows us is that those that are in prison haven't benefited from a traditional education system. Yet we still think that we should be teaching them in a traditional way. And actually that really doesn't work. And especially, a particular setting or a session within prison is like 3 hours. Well, I mean, my attention span is far shorter than 3 hours, especially if I really struggle with something. Yet we are expecting them to learn in that way. And I think we need to really look at how best someone can learn. And I think we need to be focusing on individuals, because there's also, and we know that there are higher diagnoses or non-diagnoses of neurodivergence within the prison setting, who don't learn in those traditional ways. So again, I think it's really important for us that we need to sit back and look at how a curriculum can be delivered in a really exciting and interesting way for learners, like incorporating it into actually learning how to cook. I mean, it's an amazing way of learning about your measurements and everything else. That, for me, would look like a no-brainer and a really easy way of being able to really bring that excitement back into it. And the same as whether it's within different forms of industries within the prison setting. I think it just needs to be absolutely not seen in isolation as it is at the moment. So I do think all of that needs to be reworked to ensure that you actually create a safe place as well for men to learn. I think using peers is an amazing way of being able to do that. It breaks down some of those barriers of a teacher, which again, for a number of people who are in the prison setting, have a particular trauma often associated with schools, with authority, and therefore with teachers, and the impact that has, and that can naturally put a barrier to learning. So I think it's about how we need to break those down.
Sure, that makes sense. In terms of prisons that are obviously, like every other place, is very obsessed with measuring, performance and outputs and all the rest of it. And I suppose, you've mentioned about level 2, level 3 vocational qualifications, but I'm just thinking about distance travelled. If somebody comes in unable to read and write and then can go home and read a story to their child at bedtime, the distance travelled is massive. But I just wonder what you think about how performance is measured at the moment. Should we start with Nicky?
I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. I think there is a lot of focus on the KPIs around being released into permanent accommodation, being released into a job, forgetting that actually there's so much more that needs to be done in order to get someone into a place and a position where they are ready to be able to do that with stability and with safety. So I think one of the challenges is always how you measure. how you measure that distance travelled. Because it is also about that confidence and that self-esteem and those life skills. I think that actually provides someone with the foundations to be able to then move on to the next step. So I think there needs to be a closer look at what someone's position is when they come in and where they then leave. But there also needs to be really clear opportunities in custody for people to actually access that support. And often, because of, like we've said, with a growing population, a limited number of spaces, the fact that it's all very traditional, how people actually access those services and the ability to be able to do that poses a particular challenge in therefore being able to measure that distance travelled. But there's also, for me, a particular challenge if you are wanting to understand what their situation is when they come in compared to when they're released. And it is the fact that when someone first comes into custody, they are assessed within an inch of their life. And they are not in a place really to be able to be assessed effectively. Because their world has just been turned upside down. They are experiencing trauma at that moment in time, and yet somehow we think that within those first 2 weeks is the most sufficient time to assess them for all of their needs. So I think actually in order to be able to truly understand what that journey is, that initial part needs to change.
Sure, thank you. Yvonne, you were nodding, and do you want to add anything to that?
I think the most common piece of feedback that we get from people that we work with contain words like confidence, self-respect. And if that's what we've achieved, irrespective of whether they get a job within 6 weeks or 6 hours or 6 months, that's a huge step forward. That's the core of everything. I think, as has been quite rightly said, people's worlds fall apart when they go into prison, particularly for the first time. And it is traumatising. It remains traumatising through that experience. And the work that we do both in prisons and pre and post release helps people be stronger in order to be able to deal with what they're going through at the time and what they're going to go through at the end. So the fact that we are a rehabilitation charity. We're not an employment charity. It's rehabilitation, and that can take many different forms. We use a training and employment route to achieve it, but the really important thing we do is that support and mentoring and that building people's self-belief. There aren't any KPIs for that in prisons, and in fact, many of the KPIs that do exist would be things that we don't feel are the right things to do, so we just don't do them.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. I hand you back to the chair.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Thomas, that's an interesting point you make. You're not an employment charity, you're a rehabilitation charity. You said in a few moments in answer to a previous question that you've done a really good job in getting a network of employers in Wales. Of course, for them, their interest, as well as taking an interest in the rehabilitation of an offender, is to fill a job vacancy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So is there sometimes a bit of a mismatch, and how do you make sure that actually your intentions and expectations are aligned with that of the business?
That's a really important point, and one of the key skills of our support workers is matching that individual with that employer. It's got to be done really carefully, and because we have one support worker who will work with an individual all the way through, unless they've been transferred from England. And therefore there's a proper relationship, a proper understanding. That support worker will have worked with their chef trainer as well, so they know what they're like in the workplace. And then they discuss the vacancies that are available. It's a really careful process, but it's got a very high success rate because more time is taken at the front of that process.
Thank you. And are you finding that, given the emphasis that there is at the moment on requiring people in the workplace to have a basic maths and a basic English, there's almost a kind of, feels anyway, that greater requirement in the workplace to have those paper qualifications? that's effectively pushing jobs out of reach for the kind of cohort of prisoners that you're talking about?
Not in hospitality. You know, people who turn up with a good MVQ level 2 in, you know, food production or front of house, and actually employers don't really want to see anything further.
Okay. And Nicky Park, how would you answer that?
I agree. I think, you know, within our, well, especially within our sector, the level 3 in advice and guidance provides a standard. It shows that they're able to work to a professional standard, and that'll
get them across the threshold of the
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's then for them to, there are other opportunities then once you're in employment to improve those skills, which most employers provide those opportunities, and so they will then go for those.
Great, thank you very much. Ben Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your time this morning. The committee's been told that being placed in a prison far from home can quite drastically have an impact on an individual's prospects for resettlement and rehabilitation. I think, listening to some of the answers you've given already to my colleagues, that would align with your experiences in the work that you do. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. In which case, how do you think we could improve upon the situation, if at all? If I can start with Ms. Thomas.
These conversations have been happening, to my certain knowledge, since the mid-2000s, right. Because, you know, the match between the number of prisoners from Wales and the number of prison places in Wales, and the absence of a women's facility or women's approved premises in Wales, means that, you know, that there is an inevitability about the situation. So I think it puts a lot of pressure on charities like us, because we do follow people. I suspect if you tried to fund that type of service, people would say it's, you know, not economical, you can't do it. And you can do it, because we do it. Whether you could systemize it is a different matter.
Thank you.
So I don't think there's an easy solution. I don't see there being a perfect match between the types of prison places that you need for people from Wales and the supply of those within Wales. So, and I think therein lies the core of the problem, bluntly.
Would you agree, Ms. Park?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose also, I mean, HMP Berwyn at the moment has around 70% are still English people serving a custodial sentence. So I suppose there is also an understanding of where is it because there isn't a need for those to be Welsh beds, or is it because there is such a high need within England and so therefore men are being transferred over the border? But I would also say one of the things that really needs to be worked on is consistency. I think that's where you get each prison works with in its own little kind of ecosystem, and the transfer of information. I think men don't take, like, their education records often don't leave one prison and enter the other prison with them. Hopefully things might change with the introduction of the resettlement passports. I think we will wait and see. I'm not sure they are the silver bullet that everyone hopes and thinks they will be, if I'm perfectly honest.
What are your concerns or reservations?
I think it's... I think the challenge is that it's a deep-rooted, systematic problem, and with the fact that, you know, systems just within themselves don't talk to each other as they should do, and I think I want to be proved wrong, and I truly do, because I know people that have been working on the resettlement passport and have the intentions are there, and a lot of work has been done around co-design and co-production of it. I think I just need to see that it's not just a sticky plaster, to really not addressing what the root causes are, which is fundamentally that there is inconsistencies, that people don't communicate, and who really takes ownership and responsibility of ensuring that it is up to date, because this is only as good as the information that is inputted into the system. And I think that's potentially where it could fall short.
Yeah, that's very, very useful. And Ms Thomas, you mentioned there, or you touched upon the fact, of course, that we don't have a women's facility in Wales and the impact that has on education and resettlement and rehabilitation. Of course, it's a concern that we've also heard as a committee, and indeed, of course, the Welsh Government's Hansen Review highlighted this as a particular area of concern. How do the support needs of Welsh women in custody in England returning to Wales differ to the needs of men in custody in Wales? You know, how would you describe the key differences and perhaps the challenges that arise for female offenders returning from Wales?
So, from a resettlement perspective, so if we take a woman who's coming out of style, returning to North Wales, from a resettlement perspective, we will have to help them liaise with accommodation providers, local authorities, at a distance.
Right.
They are in prison waiting to be released. Their life was pretty chaotic before they came in, and they haven't really had the opportunity to sort that out while they're in there. They might be serving a sentence, and they might have a qualification, and behaviourally things may be different for them, but all the chaos they left behind is there when you come out. The physical distance makes it far more difficult for them to talk to friends and family, sit down in a visit. If you add that to the issues that we were talking about earlier, they may have lower literacy levels. They're probably going to have some form of mental distress. You know, you add all of that together and put distance into the equation, and it really does make for quite a challenging situation. Eastwood Park to South Wales is not such a big issue because the geography is not as bad, and I mean the transport links are better. I mean Style is you know quite difficult to get to from mid Wales or North Wales, but the same issues apply even to Eastwood. You're not near home. You're not down the road from Cardiff or Newport. You're a bit further than that.
And just in terms of the education then in Style or Eastwood Park, are there any issues arising for the fact that they're Welsh women in those prisons, or do they in any way, is their experience different to their compatriots from England? No.
Not from my experience. Both of those establishments take the education and training extremely seriously, and we certainly provide exactly the same as well. So I think they're both good prisons from that perspective.
Ms. Parks, have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think just around the resettlement and rehabilitation for women is often because the providers within the female estate of those services don't have the local links and the contacts within Wales to be able to provide that seamless support. So actually, I mean, Eastwood Park is a good example of where that does happen, because the provider there is Nelson's Trust, and Nelson's Trust also provide the service for women in Wales. Right. So actually there is slightly more of a seamless transition there, and they will be able to share those networks. But if you're in Downview, you obviously have a London provider who's in there, and they're not actually based there all the time necessarily, and so they don't have that connection. So the women there, if they're wanting any support, it's very much done remotely.
Right.
There won't be someone from Nelson's Trust in Wales in Downview. If anything, it might be done through a video link. It's very unlikely that there will be legal visits done. So actually the person that's supporting them, they won't have even met potentially face to face. They will have no relationship with them, no trust in that person that they're going to. They also, on release, are released into an area that they have no idea how to navigate. And they are just, out you go. And they're, for Downview, if they've never been to London before, they've got to get a train, to maybe get the tube, to then, and they don't understand how that works. And so you're placing women who are, in many cases, vulnerable, in an even more vulnerable situation. And I mean, I've spoken to women actually in Eastwood Park who have never been to Bristol or anywhere, and so don't understand. And so you do have that added anxiety that is placed on those women. And you will also find that for those who are further away, we talk about distance, talk about families. In some cases, they won't have seen their families whilst they're in custody.
Thank you. Thank you, Jo. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Beth Winter, please.
And thank you for all the work you do. This is really fascinating. And it reminds me, because about 20 years ago I did a lot of work with homeless people, and a disproportionate number of whom were ex-offenders. And reading the brief, things haven't changed substantially at all in terms of housing. So my question is, what can and should be done to improve the housing situation of offenders when they are released, because it clearly is one of the biggest problems facing ex-offenders.
I think one of the, through CAS 3, and I really cannot remember what the acronym stands for, so apologies, but actually one of the things that came out of COVID was the fact that obviously people were still being released, and because of everything that was happening, they were being placed into temporary accommodation, often hotels, and that was funded through HMPPS. Whereas previously to that, it hadn't been, because there was always a belief or thought process that it's not MOJ, HMPPS responsibility to provide accommodation once someone is released. But that changed things, and they saw that actually there was a benefit. So actually through that, they introduced, or they continued the scheme and then introduced CAS 3, which is for those who are identified as homeless or at risk of homelessness, but a duty to refer, or the process has been done in order for them to be able to access accommodation. But they're almost in that waiting or limbo moment, because they technically still have accommodation whilst they're in prison. So that has helped. But it's still, again, very much a sticky plaster, because often then local authorities can think, well, they now have accommodation when they're released, and so we now no longer need to source something for them. So you still have this challenge of the fact that when CAS 3 comes to an end, there's still the opportunity for them to fall back into homelessness. So there still needs to be almost a link between, and you might then remember things like floating support that happened, that actually really helped bind all of those things together. And I think it's things like that are needed. I think also the fact that accommodation is often, although deemed as suitable, it's not safe, it's often not stable, it's often in areas that people have no say over whether or not it is a safe environment for them, that is potentially putting them back into places and environments that make them additionally vulnerable. So I think there needs to be something with landlords to ensure that there is very much a standard of what is expected, that local authorities hold landlords to. And I think, although we think that happens, in reality, I'm not sure it does. Because
we're just going to have to pick up the pace a little bit. Sorry, we're just running up against time.
So yeah, I would say that I think that would be one of the main challenges.
Want to add anything in terms of housing?
Very, very quickly, the CAS accommodation has absolutely improved matters, but it's kicking the can down the 180-day road. Before that scheme was around, we were seeing round about 38% of our released graduates without accommodation. It's now about 23-24%. So it, those are national figures, not Wales figures, but Wales is not very different.
Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and forgive me, we've slightly run over the time that we've allocated for the first session. There's probably a lot more that we could talk about, and in fact there are a couple of questions that we did want to ask, but if it's okay with you, we'll follow up in writing. I just want to make sure there's enough time for our second panel, so we're going to pause the broadcasting now and we'll move over to our panel number 2. But thank you both, really, really excellent evidence. Very
Suspended. The proceeding is currently 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 suspended.
Thank you. Welcome to this second section of today's evidence session, where we're looking at support for prisoners in Wales. And for the second panel, we're joined by a number of representatives from companies operating in Wales. We're joined by Darren Burns, who's Director of Diversity and Inclusion at the Timpson Group. We're joined by David Abraham, who is one of the founders of Fulcrum Scaffold Training and Safety Limited. And we're joined by Tony Hughes, who's a Director of Williams Homes. And perhaps I can kick off this part of the discussion just by asking each of you just to give us a little bit of insight into what motivated your business to engage with the prisoner community and seek to provide opportunities to prisoners. So perhaps, Mr. Burns, you could go first.
Yeah, hi, good morning everybody. It all started by accident. Our CEO, James Timpson, went to visit a local prison. He met a young serving inmate who James thought would make a great addition to the Timpson business, and we then began to proactively recruit ex-offenders into our organisation. We're now one of the largest employer of ex-offenders in the UK. Currently, about 12% of our entire workforce are made up of people who've got convictions, and we very quickly realised that there's lots of potential in prisons, and by giving people a second chance and offering that opportunity, it can have huge benefits to our business and organisation.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes.
Hi, good morning. We were approached by our business advisor at Welsh Government with an opportunity in HMP Berwyn to take on one of their workshops to offer skills training and employment opportunities. We deliver low-cost affordable housing across North and Mid Wales, and so we opened a workshop producing timber frames and various products within the prison, delivering skills and training. So it's working really well.
And typically, give us a sense of how many prisoners at Berwyn that work in those workshops?
Yep, so I think currently we're just about 30 prisoners full-time in there. I think we've had over 100 people come through our workshop and offered release on temporary licence opportunities and employment upon release within the business and on our active sites. So the skills that they've learned through that workshop have transferred to employment after release.
And so outside of that scheme, you have full-time regular employees, if you want to call it that,
yes,
right now who have come through Berwyn and come through the project?
Yes, correct.
Okay, brilliant. And Mr. Abraham, if you're able to give us a
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. We were approached by the MOJ and one of our funding partners, Procure Plus charity, some time ago to work in the prisons, and the biggest thing we see is the construction industry shortage. We struggle to get people in the construction industry, so it was a no-brainer for us, shall we say, to come in on the project to obviously fill that skill gap in the construction industry as well and give someone the second opportunity on release.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Mr. Burns, obviously Timpson is probably the brand name in the UK that's most associated with providing employment opportunities for prisoners. I mean, can you give us a sense of numbers of your employees in Wales who've been offenders? And
yeah, so we employ throughout the whole group approximately 5,000 colleagues. In Wales, we've got 91 outlets, which include Timpson outlets, Max Spielman outlets, which are our photo business, and Johnson's the cleaners as well. Out of the colleagues that we employ in Wales, 46 of them are what we would consider to be foundation colleagues or ex-offenders who've either been directly recruited from custody or who have an offending background. So when you compare that to the 650 kind of live foundation colleagues that we have in the business, we've got about 46 to 50 in Wales.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I mean, what encouragement would you give to other businesses in Wales that are thinking about their skill shortages and perhaps...
It's been a huge benefit to our business. I mean, anecdotally, the people that we recruit from prison and we give opportunities to are very loyal, they're highly productive, they're statistically more honest than people that we recruit from other streams. They stay with us longer. Often we're able to attract former professionals who wouldn't really consider working for Timpson, but quite frankly, because their options are limited, they'll consider working for us. People are often able to turn the kind of criminal tendencies into entrepreneurship, so that lots of these skills that people have, when channeled in the right way, can be transferable, and that tends to be a really good fit for our business. People also bring with them a great deal of kind of life experience, personal resilience, and it genuinely makes our organisation a more interesting, fun and rewarding place to work. But I kind of think societally as well, we very much see it as our obligation. Timpson are a big business, we're very successful, but we've got a huge social conscience, and we genuinely believe in giving people a second chance. And for us, it's proven hugely beneficial. There are 14 million people in the UK with a conviction more serious than a driving offence. So for us as an employer to throw that huge swathe of the population on the employment scrap heap and wrongly assume that they're worthless, inherently dishonest, untrustworthy, just doesn't make sense. And where many employers effectively turn their nose up at people with convictions, we don't, and we're able to attract that talent into our business. So for us, it's simple. By offering people a second chance through employment, everybody wins. The offenders win because they're not wasting their lives in custody. Offenders' families win, husbands, wives, partners, children, because they're not losing loved ones for long periods of time in custody. The taxpayer wins because the £18 billion per annum burden is significantly reduced for reoffending. But more importantly than that, we all win as a society because our communities are safer and there are fewer victims of crime. So yes, hugely successful part of our business.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much. Mr. Hughes, the experience of working with the prisoners at Berwyn, has that made your organisation a kind of an advocate for encouraging other businesses in Wales to provide those opportunities too?
Yeah, I believe so. It's gained quite a bit of publicity, what we've done. I don't think it's been done previously. Operating a production facility within the prison, delivering modern methods of construction, which obviously is addressing the shortage of affordable housing, and it's real world work. So the prisoners who are there, they come in, every day is different, and it's just like any other working environment outside the prison, so it gives them an opportunity to learn those skills. A number of people who've come into the prison have never worked a day in their life, and so they're having an opportunity to actually see what a working environment is like, working to standards and quality, and they get a real sense of purpose. The people who are there enjoy it, they see it as a big benefit, and so you're getting out of them quite a lot. Add to that the skills and training, which gives them the opportunity upon release, because obviously construction is a big industry, and there are opportunities there for people who have got convictions. It is a sort of a work stream that can overlook possible convictions. We also provide CSCS training through HMP Berwyn, so they have those health and safety cards, which gives them the opportunities to go on to construction sites. So.
And Darren Burns spoke about both the kind of the business case for hiring ex-prisoners, but also the kind of sense of social obligation that the company feels. Do you feel that that's enough? I mean, do you think that UK government should be providing some greater financial incentive to encourage businesses to hire more prisoners?
It does bring with it challenges, working in the prison industry and employment after. And while we try our best to make opportunities available, I think if there was more support, that would be taken up by more people. I think housing is a big issue. So that's one of the main challenges we have, is where people have been released, they may go out of area, and if they want to stay in North Wales, providing the housing and accommodation to allow working on construction sites is something that is a bit of a limitation.
Okay, sure. Mr. Abraham, how would you answer that question? Do you think there's enough incentive coming from government levels to encourage companies like yourselves to hire more prisoners?
Yeah, so the way our system works is that obviously we go into the prison and train the prisoners, and then what we do then, we look for the outcome for them. So we look for the employment for them, either on temporary licence or on release. Now, we've been lucky enough because we've got the NESC, National Access Scaffolding Federation, and also the Scaffold Association, who've got between them over 1,200 members, and they've bought into the project. So it's good that we can go to them and say, we've got people like getting released within your areas. Do you need any labour at this moment in time? Sometimes we have a fall because obviously social values is big now in construction. It'd be better if the government could get more involved in that, to insist that more principal contractors actually say to their subcontractors, look, we want so many people coming into the scheme here. I think that would help massively.
Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. Ruth Jones, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in this morning. You've mentioned, the great things about, attracting prisoners and ex-offenders into your businesses. What about the challenges that you face, say with, like prison staff shortages? Sometimes that affects people coming in or being able to attend training. And what about the physicals? Maybe constrictions as well. I just wonder, and things like short-term sentences, people move, or even just transfers within the prison population, if you like. I just wonder, do those things impact on your ability to do your job, if you like? Shall we start with Mr. Abraham?
Yeah, to be fair, the prison shortage doesn't affect the training when we go in, because it's a planned day, or 5 days is what we do, so it's not affected. The prison's pretty organised in that part, so even if there's a shortage at that time, with staff being off or holidays, sickness, whatever it may be, the training still goes ahead. So we haven't had that issue at this moment in time. The only issue we have is in the first day normally is getting because it's scaffolding, getting the material and the tools into the prison. But once we've got over the first day hurdle, it's fine. We don't have any of them issues at all. The staff shortage at all.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Mr. Byrne.
Huge issues for us. So staff shortages affect us in two main ways. The first way is we have a number of training academies in prisons in England, and without the appropriate number of staff to process people through the risk assessments, to allocate them to a place in our academy, we can end up in a situation where we've got 2 or 3 prisoners in our academies when we've got capacity for 16, which is always a real shame. In addition to that, we've got a number of people out working on ROTL, day release, and effectively what we're finding now is we will go into custody, we'll interview men and women in prison, we'll assess their suitability to come out and join our organisation. And when we find suitable candidates, there's a huge delay between the licence paperwork being completed, the checks which are necessary, and that individual actually leaving prison and coming out and working in our stores. Probably the worst example was a fairly recent one. It's taken about 5 months from the interview to a job offer to that individual joining our business, and that's all down to staff shortages and not having the admin staff. Lots of prison staff are now being drawn into more operational roles as well. So if the operational staff either leave or go off sick, then some of your more senior staff who look after resettlement are then being drawn in to these operational roles, and that has a really big impact. Short sentences as well, an absolute nightmare for us. The problem with short sentences is that it tends to be women who really kind of suffer the brunt of them. Women get these very, very short sentences, often sort of 6 to 8 weeks, and when you consider that women are often the kind of linchpin of the family unit, they can have devastating consequences. They can get children taken off them, put into care, they can lose accommodation. And for us as an employer, they're there for such a short time, typically a 6-week sentence, that will automatically be half to 3 weeks. But in reality, it'll be 2 weeks because people will be released on tag or home detention curfew. So what that means for us as an employer is that we can't offer ROTL because we haven't got the time to do the paperwork. I just mentioned it can take up to 5 months. And we can't train anybody in one of our academies because obviously that takes time. So all we can do in those situations are meet people, assess them for being work ready more generally, and arrange to meet them when they get released and offer them a job that way. But I think that the saddest thing about short sentences for me is that prisoners aren't able to access the services which they need in terms of drug and alcohol services, etc.
Yeah, you make the point very concisely and clearly there. Thank you. And we did experience that we heard it from other witnesses as well. Thank you, Mr. Hughes.
One of the things we worked quite closely with HMP Darren was to make our workshop an essential workshop. So that allows the workshop to operate when there are staff shortages. So where other workshops in the industries will be closed due to the shortages, ours is kept open as much as possible. Training days, etc. We will have allocation of staff to ensure that the facility operates and runs, and obviously as a business that's really important to us because we plan our work so that the production meets our targets. In terms of short sentences, it's not something we've really experienced too much of. The training programme that we do through our classroom to provide qualifications as well as a 12-week programme, so it's a relatively short programme. And I don't think we've had any instances where people have failed to complete that due to sentences, short sentences. What we have found though is that when Cat Ds are offered, a lot of the prisoners will choose to move away from HMP Berwyn, and we see that as a bit of a loss, because people who've come through the process will get a Cat D option, and just the like an open prison,
Right.
and so they will then choose to transfer, and that can be 1 or 2 days notice. We're quite lucky in that the workshop we have, because of the environment and the true job satisfaction, it is very popular, so we do have a lot of people who want to come into the workshop, so replacing them is quite easy, but obviously you come back with people who need training from the beginning. So we have a core number of people who we try and use as mentors, and that's something that we've kind of rolled on and learnt as we've gone. So
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll hand you back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Beth Winter, please.
Thank you. And my question is to you, Mr. Abraham, because you deliver courses under the Future Skills programme, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
So what has been your experience of doing that?
We were doing it previously before the new contract came through with MOJ. The experience has been good. We were already operating it anyway in England, mainly in Cat Ds in England. So we had a lot of ROTL there, released on temporary licence. I don't think there are opportunities as much in Wales. Berwyn does have a Cat D wing there, housing, but there's not that many coming through it. So I think that's one of the things, is that if you can get more people released on temporary licence, it does help them coming back into society a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier for them, because what happens then is on release, they're already used to being into work, so they don't want to spend as much time at home with the family, back around the family. Sounds terrible, that, doesn't it? But they want to get back out into the working environment because they're used to work. So we find, when we've been doing it in the England setup, it's been a lot, with Cat Ds, it's been a lot easier going through that system. Like I think it was mentioned earlier on by the other panel, that when they get released, it's a bit harder for them coming straight back into that society. Some people are coming straight back into society who've been in prison for 10 to 20 years. So they're finding anew, there's a lot of changes, they've got to adapt to them changes. It's getting back used to into a normal day living. Where when you do a Cat D sort of, where they can go out on a release on temporary licence process, it makes it a lot more an easy lead-in process going back into society, if that makes sense. So we find that part really, really good. On the Cat C side of it, it does become more hard, because you'll get people leaving prison and their support people will contact you and say they're not ready. You're going to have to wait for a bit, they're not ready. And then they're going back, and so, in some cases they've got, like you'll know yourself in Wales, you can have isolated villages where the bus route doesn't start till 10:30 in the morning or 9:30 going through the village. So it's them getting used to that sort of public transport or transport ways of how they can get to the job, where if they were on a temporary licence, they'll already have that system in place, if that makes sense, yeah.
The programme is due to end, I think, in 2025.
March, yeah.
What are your feelings about that? Do you think it should be extended?
Yeah, I think it should be extended, but I think a better system could be in place where it's released on temporary licence, so we're actually bringing the people through on a proper rehabilitation way.
So at the moment, then you do the course with them in prison, and then it stops after they've come out?
So what happens at the moment is it's a 5-day course, and then what happens then is that they get interviewed and offered the job. Now obviously we've got to keep in mind there that they're being offered the job at that point. Some of them might be getting out for another number of months. So the job option might still be there, but we'll still find them, everyone who attends the course, we find them a potential employer for release when they get released from prison. And that's where it becomes better if they can get released on temporary licence, because obviously they're getting into a routine rather than being released and then having to wait 2 to 3, 4 weeks of getting into a routine.
There's ongoing support.
Ongoing support, yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Virginia.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and welcome, gentlemen. My questions are for Darren. Just following on, you gave us some great stats, but I just wanted to pin you down on that. In terms of the number of colleagues you have across the UK, and what percentage of those would be foundation colleagues, and then also in terms of numbers for Wales, and what number would be foundation colleagues in Wales?
Okay, so our colleagues, circa sort of 5,000, England, Wales and Scotland and Ireland. Our foundation colleagues, about 12% of our entire workforce, so that equates to about 650-ish sort of live foundation colleagues. The reason we make that distinction in terms of being live foundation colleagues is that when people join us from prison or who say that they've got an offending background, they are classed as a foundation colleague for 2 years and then they will naturally fall off that list. In reality, we estimate we've probably got in excess of 1,000 colleagues across the business who've either joined us from prison or who have an offending background. We started doing this in 2002, so we've got people now with sort of 13, 14, 15 years service who we've recruited from prison.
Okay, and that's a stat UK-wide, and then the stats for Wales?
Yeah, stats for Wales. So we've got probably about 2,500 outlets, which encompass Timpson, Max Spielman and Johnson. We've also got our hospitality arm as well, so we've got a number of pubs and restaurants, some of which are in North Wales. Our coverage in terms of branches for Wales is about 91, so that includes Timpson, Max and Johnson, and foundation colleagues for Wales is about 46 to 50.
Right, okay, thank you. Okay, so that 12% figure for the whole of the UK, what's that figure for Wales?
I'd have to check.
So if you could get back to me, that's great.
Apologies.
And then I just want to ask you, in terms of you, you've got the training, the New Futures networks and the training academies in both England and Wales. So how does your experience differ between providing that support in Wales in the devolved administration?
We've not got them in Wales. The academies that we've got are an H&P Downview, which is a women's prison in Sutton. We've got another one in a women's prison in Wakefield, H&P New Hall, and we've got an external academy in Kent, which is fed by 5 or 6 prisons in the Kent cluster. In addition to that, we've got 3 commercial academies in H&P Thorncross, which is a prison in the northwest. We do work with the Welsh prisons. We've got a number of people out from Rottle, from H&P Prescoed. We work closely with Berwyn, and we were instrumental in setting up the employment advisory boards, which have been a huge success. In terms of any notable differences in terms of provision or our work that we do in the foundation, I can't think of anything that really springs to mind. I think the sad thing for us is obviously we're a commercial business. We're all about recruiting good people, give them a second chance, but we need a vacancy. We don't receive any government funding, or we've not got charitable status. All this is paid for through the business. So whenever we offer somebody an opportunity, there's got to be a live vacancy. And the sad reality is that obviously Wales being smaller than England, we've not got as many vacancies there, hence why we can't offer as many opportunities.
Thank you. And then in your experiences, are prisons in Wales facing different challenges, unique challenges to those in England?
No, I think they're all facing lots of challenges, obviously in terms of budgetary restraints, staff shortages and the kind of general culture. We seem to be locking more people away. Prison population is set to increase to 109,000 by this time next year, I think it is. Which is pretty frightening. So yeah, I think all the challenges are pretty universal, really.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Burns, earlier you were talking about some of the qualities, distinctive qualities that prisoners bring to the business, being entrepreneurial, and interesting backgrounds. Is there a lot of work that needs to get done at a foundation employee level to bring their skills up? I mean, how work ready are they? Or can you just throw them at the deep end and they can crack on with customers? It
depends. So for us, we very much see prisons as a real sort of cross-section of society. So I think the sad thing is that in our estimations, probably only a third of the prison population are what we would consider to be work ready. So able to turn up every day, do a hard day's work, be there on time, etc., etc. The other 2/3, very sadly, have got lots of complex needs and issues surrounding mental health, addiction, physical ailments, homelessness, or a combination of all 4. And whilst we don't want to throw this cohort on the scrap heap, it's clear that there needs to be lots more work done with these people. It would be wrong of us to offer somebody in the midst of an addiction employment, because obviously it's going to be very chaotic. A job is not what some people need, unfortunately. So what we've gotten very good at over the years is selecting the right people who are work ready. Interestingly, one of the other panel members mentioned before, being released from prison is often more traumatic than being sent there in the first place. So what we do is we build in flexibility and support for people who are joining us from prison. And again, all the kind of anecdotes are true. People have been locked away for a long time. They need space, they need a safe environment to get back up to speed with the pace of life, and we're able to give them that safe environment and allow them to come. Interestingly, with our academies is that we provide full training, not only in all of our skills and services, but we continually assess people for attitudes and behaviours. And anecdotally, the feedback that we get from our academy graduates is because we go to such great lengths to replicate that high street environment, albeit within a prison. When people eventually get released and get resettled, they find themselves in a Timpson branch, a Max Spielman branch. Everything's the same. The POS, the merchandise, the till. So people like that kind of familiarity and that consistency.
Mm-hmm. And then just listening to what you said in response to Virginia, the reason you don't have a training academy in Wales is purely because the size of the Timpson footprint in Wales is obviously smaller. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Ben Lake, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr Abraham and Mr Hughes, you've both mentioned quite a bit in answer to some of my colleagues, the work that you do in prisons in Wales and some of the courses that you've established. I'm just keen to understand what role, if any, the New Futures network played in kind of encouraging or supporting the establishment of those courses. If I can start with Mr Hughes and then Mr Abraham, please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. We worked with the New Futures Network to create a new qualification as part of the work we do in HMP Berwyn. So they currently get joinery level 2 within the prison setting, and we've worked with them to deliver a modular housing MMC, so modern methods of construction education qualification. Unfortunately, it's only level 1, and we are looking to move that up to a level 2. But that is to address the shift in the Welsh Government's affordable housing process, where they are pushing for modern methods of construction to be delivered, and that is something that we're advocating across all of our sites with our clients and the partnerships we have with various housing associations. So New Futures Network have been instrumental in setting that up. We built a classroom within our workshop which can have 12 inmates in there at any one time. So that's on top of the 30 prisoners we have within the factory.
Right.
And so that's worked very well, and it's something that we're looking to develop further.
Would the network then also sort of provide any support in linking up or connecting, potential skills needed in various parts of Wales? For example, you mentioned many housing authorities now are having to shift over to these modern methods. Does the network have any role in sort of connecting, I suppose, the new skills with the gaps in
no, I don't think so.
No, so it's very more focused in the prison provision.
Yeah, it's something that we're pushing because of the work we're doing with our housing association partners. So Clwyd and Group Cynefin Adra are all keen to see the modern methods of construction delivered on site, and they are very supportive of the initiative that we're doing at HMP Berwyn, so supportive of release on temporary licence on the sites. And that circular economy, so by reinvesting in these people, when they're released and offered employment, they'll be reinvesting into the community. So
okay. Mr. Abraham.
And New Futures have been very helpful to us, because they helped us set up the 2 workshops, one in Cardiff, one in Berwyn. They also purchased the material for them workshops as well, and the tools for the people to do it. It's a 5-day course we deliver in the 2 prisons. The prisoners get a level 1 health and safety, but they also get a CISRS card, which is the Construction Industry Scaffold Record Scheme. Right. So they get the labourer's card for that. So they get actually 2 qualifications, which helps them then when they come out on unemployment for 2 options. They can go into a scaffolding labourer or any construction labouring sort of role. The course we do, as I said, is a 5-day course, so we try and break it up, because obviously they're spending a lot of time behind the door anyway, so when they come out of their cell they want to be more active. So we split it up where we do a lot of hands-on practical exercises, building small scaffold structures, so they get used to the manual handling, they get used to the actual how components work, how they go together. So they're getting them sorts of functional skills sort of thing, the skills they need to go into employment. In some cases we find some prisoners will come to us and go, scaffolding's not for me, but I've got an engineering qualification or I've got a bricklaying qualification. Well, we're a great believer that we don't leave anyone behind. So what we do then is we try and look for employment in another sector for them on what they're saying to us, because we get a lot of heavy goods drivers. So again, in Scaffold, and the materials logistic-wise have got to get to a site, so we then look for obviously that role for that person who's doing that. So, and yeah, so from that side, New Futures have helped massively on that.
That's very, very useful. And would it be fair then to say that without the New Futures sort of network and support, would these courses, the course that you've established, would it have come to pass?
We had funding pre this anyway, but we didn't have funding for Cardiff.
I see.
So from the
There's
Cardiff,
an expansion of it.
Yeah, from the Cardiff point, it's helped massively for there.
The same question to you, Mr. Hughes, how instrumental was the support from the network in terms of expanding the courses? And
I think it was very instrumental. I don't think we would have been given the opportunity without it. It was something we hadn't done before. The opportunity was given to us, and we sort of took it forward as a partnership. So it's worked very well.
And obviously, Mr. Burns, I know your work long predates the network. But is there anything that, from your experience, could be improved upon the network to help?
Our experience has been exceptionally positive, really. We work in partnership with NFN, so essentially I spend lots of my time now helping other businesses to recruit ex-offenders, right. Because what they don't have is any understanding of even the terminology, the language. They've never been into a prison, they've got no concept of risk, so I help them put processes in place and successfully employ ex-offenders and bring them into their business. NFN do that kind of professionally. So what we find is that a lot of businesses will now go to the NFN. They will broker those introductions with local prisons. They will help businesses successfully establish workshops. But what businesses often want is that real. They want all the real sort of stories from the businesses. So NFN will refer people to us so we can chat with them and tell them what it's really like. And we work with them quite closely.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Is there a category of prisoner that you won't, as a matter of policy, work with, either because there's too much risk around them or because history tells you that they make difficult employees?
Yeah, so in terms of a category of prisoner, we've got 3 offences which we won't employ. So anybody convicted of sexual offences, anybody convicted of arson, particularly arson with endangerment, and anybody convicted of terrorism offences. Obviously, we've got really good reasons why. We're a customer-facing business. We've got concerns over reputational damage and also the reaction of our existing colleagues. And quite frankly, we're a shoe repair business. We're not qualified to manage that sort of risk. But anybody else, we'll certainly assess and we'll give them an opportunity. For example, we've got 60 lifers working for us. So these are people who've committed murder. So we don't shy away from people who've committed very serious offences. What we do focus on are aggravating factors to an offence. So if somebody discloses to us that they've committed an assault, if it transpires that assault was racially motivated or homophobic, it's probably not going to be supported by us.
Okay. And obviously, you've been talking about it's a long-standing piece of work that Timpson have been doing on this, and I think you've said that you've got guys who've now been in prison but been working for you for 17 years. I mean, presumably they're as able to go on to senior levels in the business as anybody else. And do you have kind of people at kind of director, senior manager level?
We have people at director level. We have regional managers, area development managers. I'm a director for the business. I've also spent time in custody. I've got lived experience, so I'm an example of somebody who's managed to be promoted and up to the ranks.
Fantastic. We slightly run over our time. I'm sure we would love to carry on talking to you, but unfortunately we've all got to get downstairs. Beth, did you want to jump in with a quick question?
Because you're all primarily employers, but listening to you this morning, you would do a lot more. You've mentioned about the housing support. So prison is there to rehabilitate, that's the stated purpose. Does prison work from your experience? Mr. Burns, do you want to?
I would say no. Quite sadly, I think prison should be the place when people's lives start to improve from the minute they set foot in there, and quite often it's not. We often see people coming out in a wet state, often with nowhere to live, often with no sort of skills, education, provision, sort of rehabilitation in terms of drugs or mental health. So no, prisons don't work in my opinion.
The statistics we've been given is the people who've gone through our workshop generally reoffending is very low, and so it's difficult to say. We've only been operational 2.5 years, so our experience is quite limited, but we see the benefit of providing skills and training and opportunities. Beyond that, it's a little bit outside of.
Yeah, does it work? So For me, it's how you define work, because obviously these are programmes to help people once they come out of prison.
Yeah.
I personally think that if the prison worked, why do people have to go to an approved premises on release of prison? So it tells you that it doesn't work. I personally don't think it does work. I think, if I'm being honest, I think the prison service is broken. And I think it could be more helpful for them people coming back into society, and I think it lacks that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you for giving your time, being here with us, sharing your insights and your experiences. It means a lot to us. It's really, really useful as we're thinking about how prisons are run in Wales and how things can be improved. So we are grateful for you being here and bring the meeting to an end. Order.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.